Bedford, Virginia, and the National D-Day Memorial, at least virtually. Let's say it's kind of wintry here in Virginia, but the internet still works. So we are delighted to offer our first Lunchbox lecture of 2025, and it promises to be a great one. Our speaker today is historian Gina DiNicolo. Did I say that correctly?
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah. Gina is a Maryland native and an award-winning magazine journalist who has written on military and military history topics. She's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and served as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. She worked on the Department of Defense's 50th anniversary of World War II commemorations, where highlight was her work on the commemoration of Guadalcanal. And she also served as chief historian for the Korean War commemorations and has edited a 2-volume work on the U.S.'s war in Afghanistan. Beyond all of that, Gina holds a doctorate in clinical psychology. And when she is not writing, you'll probably find her dancing the Argentine tango. And Gina, that has to be a Lunchbox lecture in itself. We'll have to get you back for some demonstrations at some point. But wow, what a great honor it is to have you and to hear about your book, The Black Panthers, A Story of Race, War, and Courage, about the 761st Tank Battalion in World War II. A great story, and we are eager to hear it. So, Gina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. We're going to have a train go by. Not that I timed this. I live on what is the old Manassas Gap Railroad. And historically, it's not World War II, but Civil War wise, I'm right across the street from where Stonewall Jackson, he marched his army from Paris. I live 6 miles from Paris, Virginia. He marched his army here and loaded it on the trains to go fight First Manassas. So it's not quite the same railroad. It now belongs to CSX, but if you hear anything, that's the train going by.
I should have said that you were also recently on our podcast at the World War II History Conference down in Richmond. And when we're not on the road at a conference like that, we are in a studio right by train tracks.
Oh.
So we frequently have to pause while the train rumbles by.
Can we get the slide there it goes. Thank you. Well, as John mentioned, I'm a magazine journalist, and the story on the 761st actually began as a magazine article. Coworker, colleague had told me that his wife's father had been involved in camp liberations at the end of World War II, specifically Dachau and Buchenwald. And I was like, that's interesting. I want to know more. And I met a number of the members of the 761st. I interviewed them. I did research. So this is before 2010. In 1992, there was a documentary and an accompanying book called The Liberators. Let me go to that. Let's see. So there was a documentary, an Academy Award nominated documentary, and a corresponding book called The Liberators about the 761st and their work in camp liberation at Dachau and Buchenwald. So again, shortly before 2010, I published this article, or my magazine publishes the article. After it's published, I start hearing little murmurs that the camp liberation never happened. And what? What do you mean it never happened? And I had asked the article had been out for a while, and I had asked my magazine to pull it down. I said, with any question, I don't want anything that's not accurate out there. So given the question over camp liberation, and I'm very exacting in what I write and what I put out, and was, I was sort of taken aback when I found this out. That's what predicated the book. And my research in this, I call it my No Stone Unturned tour. My research in this is exhaustive. I traveled to the country, going to different archives, interviewing people, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how this book came about. And it's considered really the definitive history on the 761st Tank Battalion, which was a standalone tank battalion in World War II. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'll talk a little bit more. Their war service, their combat service speaks for itself. I'll get into why this concentration camp thing may have come up. So I'll talk a little bit on history of in the first chapter of the book, I go over kind of a history of Black military in the United States. And, you hear about, the Revolutionary War, Civil War, et cetera. But it really begins, for me, in my opinion, with the post-war, post-Civil War, with the creation of the 9th and 10th Cav and the 24th and 24th Infantry Regiments. And those units were pretty much relegated to the frontier, our Western frontier. And I use this photo, and as offensive or as awful as, or as great, however you look at Blazing Saddles, Sheriff Bart really embodies the sort of the Black experience on defending the frontier. The settlers appreciated and really looked to the men who were protecting them, and they enjoyed considerable esteem. So, Black soldiers have a rich history. Let's see, let's go to the next slide. So Black soldiers deployed to in the Spanish-American War. We get to World War I. The infantry regiments, the 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments, did not deploy. What the U.S. Army did instead was they stood up 2 new units. And the 15th New York became the 369th Infantry Regiment, or the Harlem Hellfighters, as you may have heard of them. They deployed to France to fight World War I, 1917, 1918. And the U.S. forces didn't use them in combat. They were using them for labor. So eventually they were moved to the French, and they fought for the French at the front. And here's a little vignette on 2 of the gentlemen in the 369th, Henry Lincoln Johnson and Needham Roberts. They had guard duty one night. So 2 a.m, they hear snip, 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 snip. Sure enough, the Germans were making their way into the French lines. And really, Roberts was injured early on in this skirmish. Johnson took over and basically repelled a platoon-sized attack, and was awarded rewarded by France. In 2015, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and this was clearly a Medal of Honor action. And currently, what was Camp Polk in Louisiana has been renamed for him and is now Camp Johnson. So also with World War I, let's look a little different. With World War I, aside from the Black units, we get Dwight Eisenhower and George Patton, who come on the scene. And they're both known with the new weapon, the tank that we actually get from Winston Churchill and the British. So let's So there are the Harlem Hellfighters coming back from World War I. So as with every war, the various services, in this case, the Army sits down and looks at how it's going to, looks at the last war, looks how it's going to fight the next war. And they determined that, okay, blacks will fight. That's a given. They're citizens of the United States, they will fight. And this is something that they had put out in 1922. They looked at it pretty closely and played with all kinds of options. They even, in my research, I found that they toyed with the idea of integration, racial integration. That fell apart, and they decided, that it would be segregated, but that they would serve. Let's go to the next slide. So as we get into the 30s, I don't have a photo of Judge Hasty, but they're kind of working this whole race thing out. And Judge William Hasty, who advised Franklin D. Roosevelt, was successful in desegregating. I didn't know this before I started researching this. OCS, Officer Candidate School, was desegregated. It was not integrated. It was not segregated. Truman Gibson came on at the beginning of the war as an advisor to War Secretary Henry Stimson. Now let's go to the next slide here. So again, they're looking at how they're going to do this, and they came up with specific units that were going to be, they're not all black, they're predominantly black. It's mostly, black enlisted, and then a mixture of black and white officers. The Army decided that there would be 3 tank battalions, and these are standalone units. They don't work together, they're completely independent. This is also true of white units at this time. You have, divisions, you have all this, but you also have standalone tank, artillery, tank destroyer battalions. So the first one to stand up was the 758th. It had changed designators, but it was the 758th in May 8th of 1941. The second one was the 761st. You see its insignia, unit insignia, on April 1st, 1942. And the soldiers drawn to fill the 761st came from the 750, the original tank battalion, the 758th, and other training centers, and they brought them in. Let's see here. The 758th, 761st, all these training battalions are down at sprawling Camp Claiborne in southern Louisiana. There's from the period. This is a picture of Camp Claiborne during World War II. And here is Camp Claiborne now. It's near Alexandria, Louisiana. It's all overgrown. You can still, if you drive, park on the side of the road, kind of walk around, you can see ruins of buildings and things like that. So it's still there in a way. So as I said, people start coming to the 761st, and William McBurney, who was 17, volunteered and comes out of training and comes right to the 761st. William McBurney's from New York. He was raised in Hell's Kitchen with a single father, only child, single father. He wanted to volunteer. He saw, and the 761st is really a big story of opportunity. And McBurney saw the opportunity that the Army had, and he had planned to be an aviator. He planned to fly, and that was his plan all along. His father had been with 369th in World War I, and was somewhat cautious and said, and this is a quote when I met with Mr. McBurney, they don't train coloreds, Billy. But Billy wouldn't have any of it, and just said that, that's old. There's clearly opportunity here. He volunteers and goes off to training. Another New Yorker is E.G. McConnell. His parents are from Jamaica. His first name's Ellsworth. It's something he hated, and goes by E.G. And here's a photo of him with his Boy Scout troop in Jamaica, New York. He volunteers also. He's underage. He volunteers at 16. This is a picture of Ivan Harrison. I guess you can't see me pointing at it. On the left, this is him as a captain. He had also volunteered and was chosen to be an officer and went through OCS. Let's see. Richard English was drafted out of New Orleans, and he was an educator in New Orleans for 10 years. So people are coming from all over to stand up the 761st. In fact, the first officers, Ivan Harrison, Sam Brown from South Carolina, and Charlie Barber were the first Black officers to arrive at the 761st. So this is the unit insignia. You see the Black Panther head, and it says "Come Out Fighting." That is not the original. And I wish I had an image of the original. I saw this at the Department of Heraldry, which at the time was the Quartermaster General. And at that time, the Quartermaster General, the unit stands up, they shoot off an insignia. So what they, or designated, what they sent was, again, for the 761st, was an image of basically two amputated arms wringing out a dish rag. And the motto was, "We wring them out." Well, the battalion commander at the time, Ed Cruz, who was eager to move on from this unit, saw this, and he contacts the Quartermaster General. Was like, do you know these guys are Black? So the Army comes back and says, fine, send us some information, and we'll send you something final. So Ivan Harrison and others with the 761st got together. They drew this panther head, and they came up with six slogans, one of which was "Come Out Fighting," which was an ode to very popular boxer Joe Louis. So they sent these to Washington, and this is what came back. Washington chose "Come Out Fighting" and that panther head. So that's how they got that, and I think it's one of the best looking ones in World War II. Paul Bates makes his way from the 758th to the 761st in 1942-43 timeframe. And the larger photo here is of Bates as a football player at Western Maryland College, which is now McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland. And the reason I have the photograph of him as a football player, or emphasizing the football player, is because his leadership with this unit really took on, he was captain of the football team at college, and it really takes on more of a football sports kind of relationship than typical, what you might think of the military. So again, their training is at Camp Claiborne, and their liberty is in nearby Alexandria, Louisiana. And these are men from the 761st. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Bear with me here. Leslie McNair, Lieutenant General, head of U.S. Army Ground Forces. Big supporter of Black units, really sees no difference. Everyone is combat wise. And McNair, when he took over Army Ground Forces in 1941, he knew that he needed to sort of clean house and get rid of the dead weight. So in 1941, they had what was called the Louisiana Maneuvers, and this was in southern Louisiana at Polk and that whole area. Of course, this is before the 761st. And so out of that, what happens is McNair fires 31 of 42 generals, and this is where Patton and Eisenhower really shine. Let's see if I have. So Patton shines, Eisenhower shines as a tactician. So the next year in 40, so here's the picture of the 761st, or Alpha Company. So the next year, we'll go back to this. In 43, they have another Louisiana Maneuvers. And in my research, looking at the units that were going, it was late in the planning that the 761st was added. So Paul Bates in the 761st got to go to the Louisiana Maneuvers and did quite well. And McNair even visited the battalion and had, commented on how well they fought. In fact, they did so well that they left Claiborne in 43, again in Louisiana, and went to what was then Camp Hood in Texas. Camp Hood to be an aggressor unit. So 761st goes to Camp Hood to be an aggressor unit for tank destroyers. And I don't know if you know about tank destroyers. They look like tanks, except there's no turret. They're kind of open. And you may have heard of Kasserine Pass, which was a complete, wipeout for the tank destroyers. What happens with standalone, and this is unfortunate, what happens with standalone tank battalions, tank destroyers are standalone tank battalions or tank destroyer battalions. And they are, the tank destroyer was designed to fight as a battalion. It wasn't supposed to be split up into separate tanks or platoons or companies. They're supposed to fight almost like a phalanx. And what they would do is fire their guns and basically run away. What happened at Kasserine Pass is, I call them guns for grabs. They were split up and it just did not work out. So they opened up Hood. They established Camp Hood solely for the training of the tank destroyers. So the 761st operated as an aggressor unit and did very well there. Let's see. So while at Camp Hood, Jackie Robinson joins the 761st. You know him as a baseball player. He was actually known for his football prowess. He's out of UCLA. He was a four-sport letterman. Again, was known for football. He had been in Missouri, and they would have him play on the team. And if an opposing team, and he's in the Army, and if an opposing team didn't want to play a team with any black guys, they would pull him off the team, play their game, then put him back on the team. So he didn't really like this. They sent him to Hood. He goes to the 761st. And Bates, being the third team All-American football player, it was just this immediate attraction between the two. And they just hit it off. Jackie Robinson had been an All-American, though he was first team. And so Bates is, like I said, completely taken by Robinson. He makes him the unit morale officer. The 761st engages in playing football. In fact, in one game, and William McBurney told me about this, McBurney had the football. Jackie Robinson tackles him and completely knocks the wind out of him. And Jackie Robinson had helped him up, and it was just kind of a nice memory for McBurney. But so in July of, well, let me backtrack. So we're in 44 now. June 6th is D-Day. June 9th 3 days after D-Day, the 761st hears or receives word that it is going to Europe and going into combat. And there have been debate about this, about what they were going to do with the black units, if they were going to deploy or not, back and forth, back and forth. So June 9th, they get word that they're deploying. And Robinson is going to go with them. Early July, there's a bus incident in Texas, and Robinson's brought up on charges. And so the Army says to the people, Camp Hood want Bates to bring Robinson up on charges. He refuses. They transfer Bates to another unit that will bring him up on charges. And I had mentioned Truman Gibson earlier. A defense attorney was appointed to Robinson, last name McCline, and he meets with Jackie Robinson. He's like, oh, I really appreciate this, but it's fine. Washington or the NAACP will be sending me an attorney, et cetera, et cetera. It never happened. The NAACP didn't send him an attorney. Truman Gibson chose not to give any attention to this. He received nothing from Washington. So Klein ended up as his defense attorney and really turned this incident. And what the incident was Robinson refused to move to the back of the bus. And at this time, the whole bus thing and race, at this time, soldiers, servicemen, black servicemen were not subjected to this, but these people on this bus were determined, and again, he was brought up on charges. Klein defends him. Shortly before the 761st deploys, Bates appears at his trial, speaks on his behalf, and Robinson is acquitted. A few days later, the 761st, this is now in August, the 761st heads to New York to board the Esperance to head to England and eventually to the European theater. So let's see. So there's Robinson later. Here are officers from the 761st in the mess hall in England. So they leave in August. They're in England in September. In October, they head to France. They land at Normandy and they get their tanks. They get 4 battalions of Sherman tanks, and then they make the 400-mile trek from the Normandy beaches to what's now the front. So the front is now inland, 400 miles in the Lorraine area of France. So they get there at the end of October. They attach to the 26th Infantry Division. So this is an important slide. Again, these standalone tank battalions are basically guns for grabs, the way the divisions, because they attach themselves to a division, and it's up to the division on how they want to use them. So you see they go from the 26th to the 87th to the 17th to the 44th to the 87th. They're in combat 183 days. They're not fighting the whole time, but so for 183 days, they're being bounced around division to division, and they fight very well. But you can see the upheaval from one to the other, to the other, to the other. So they get to the 26th Infantry Division around October 31st, and they're greeted. November 4th, George Patton greets them. There's another picture of something. So Patton welcomes the 761st by itself. And Patton gives them, a speech and everything. And these are the most stirring words. Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. Okay, this isn't true. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Most of all, your race is looking forward to you. Don't let them down, and damn you, don't let me down. From this point, to the end of their lives, many of the members of the 761st continued to be enamored of George Patton. In fact, when I visited some of their homes, most of them had a framed photograph of George Patton hanging in their homes, which I found really interesting. Had nothing but wonderful things to say about Patton. Let's see. So again, guns for grabs, and they're with the 26th Infantry Division. So on November, let's see, we're going to go back here again. So on November 8th, they start to move into combat. Paul Bates is out directing his tanks, and Paul Bates gets shot, and he's hit, he gets shot. And one of the infantry regiments in its records, and I saw this in my research, records that Bates is shot by his own men. According to Bates, Bates was shot by shot by the enemy, shot by the Germans, by a machine gun nest. So what I think probably happened is, I don't think the Germans, even though they were at the front, I don't think there was a German machine gun nest. And had there been a machine gun nest, there wouldn't have been a single bullet hitting Paul Bates. I think the Army, I think the 26th Infantry Division went along with what Bates said, since he was on the ground and he's the battalion commander. I do think he was probably shot by one of his own men who just happened to be jittery. They would have no reason to wound Bates, et cetera, et cetera. Also for Bates, big ego guy, believes in reincarnation. Bates is his own story. My guess is Bates really didn't want to be the guy shot by his own men, et cetera, et cetera. So being shot by the enemy is a much better story, much better for your career. So that became sort of the official story. I still think it was a jittery member of the 761st. Things are shut down for the 8th, and on the 9th, the 761st heads into combat. So one of the companies, Charlie Company, they're heading into the fight for Lorraine. And the Charlie Company hears that there is a hellacious tank ditch. And that's, it's an obstacle for tanks. And if the front tank goes into it, it's stuck. There's no getting out of it. And the tank column really cannot back up or do anything. So they're pretty much stuck when this happens. They hear about this tank ditch. Sure enough, they find the tank ditch. And once they do, all hell breaks loose. They're stuck. The fire's coming in. The 88 guns are shooting at them, et cetera, et cetera. The tankers are surrounded. They're not surrounded. The Germans are to the front and the rear. The 761st, they dismount their tanks. They're trying to escape to their flanks. And what happens is, First Sergeant Sam Turley and one of the platoon commanders, and Turley was not supposed to be with the 761st that day. He happened to be with the unit, or wasn't supposed to be with Charlie Company that day. He happened to be with the unit. He happened to be commanding a tank. And he and this platoon commander dismount their tanks and cover the evacuation. 14 tankers were killed, including Sam Turley and the platoon commander who covered the escape. There's a lot more to this action. Sam Turley's action is clearly a Medal of Honor action. He was awarded the Silver Star. I've attempted a couple of times over the years to have his award upgraded. Apparently, I'm just not doing very well at it. I still believe his action's a Medal of Honor action. Now, Reuben Rivers, who was with Able Company, fierce fighting from really throughout November. Rivers is almost like a one-man. He's pretty amazing. He's awarded the Silver Star in November. His medal is upgraded in 1997 to the Medal of Honor. Let's see. This is the 761st making the front page of Stars and Stripes as they're closing in on getting close to fighting in Germany. Here's the 761st on one of their tanks. This one's named Cool Studs Incorporated. Not unlike aircraft, the tankers name their tanks. So this is one example. So I have highlighted that December 20th to the 23rd, they're with the 87th Infantry Division. Let's see. So, as I said, they fight for Lorraine. And what's interesting is, so there's all this fierce combat. You know, Bates is out. Bates is gone. They don't have a battalion commander, or they don't have their regular battalion commander. Someone comes in as a stand-in. Fierce fighting, a number of tankers killed, but these guys are so well trained, and Bates had trained them like a football team, and special teams, this and that, and in their training at Claiborne and their training and the work that they did at Hood, you see that they start early in the morning. And they're even in classes as late as 8, 9 o'clock at night. These guys are go, train. So they're incredibly well trained. So by the time they get into combat in France, despite the heavy fighting and losing Bates, etc., they know what to do, and they're just a fabulous fighting unit. So Bates comes back to the unit in mid-February. By the time we get to late March, again, they're moving unit to unit, it's time to smash the Siegfried line, or to get across the Siegfried line. Let's see if I can. Okay, let's go back to this. Oh, I'm having trouble with this. So Bates is put in charge of what was called Task Force Rhine. And he puts his team together and successfully opens up a large enough area in the German line so that the Americans can go through. This is not unique to the division they were with or to the 761st. This was happening all along the way, but the 761st did open this up for their unit at that time. What's interesting about Bates is from the end of Task Force Rhine, so we're in late March, April into the beginning of May. I had gone through Bates' correspondence to his woman who later became his wife, and you see a change in Bates to where he's becoming very depressed, and you can see it in the letters. He's just kind of losing touch, and it's kind of interesting. So the 761st makes its way across Germany, and on April 19th, four members of the 761st, including Bates' executive officer, Ed Reynolds, are taken prisoner by the Germans. And it was interesting. They released 3 of the 4 the next day. Ed Reynolds was with them more than a week. And when they had interrogated Reynolds, any information he really had, they already knew. And he said he was very well treated, and he was released the beginning of May. So referring back to Rhine and everything Task Force Rhine and all the fighting that the 761st did, Bates had written in his letter to, again, the woman who would later be his wife, we will never get the credit we deserve for it, as others won't think it possible to do what we accomplished. And that pretty much sums it up. May 8th is VE Day. And so 761st makes it to Austria. And you know how you see everyone cheering and fireworks and all this other stuff. This isn't true of all the units, and the 761st was one of those units. Bates was rather sullen and did address the men and basically said, well, we lived through it. So there was not a lot of jubilation. The book ends with May 8th and pretty much ends with that. May 9th, the unit starts to fall apart. As you probably know, once that war ended in Germany, I mean, the US guys are done. All right, done. I want to go home. And the initial people, the first people to go home were the POWs. So the four captured from the 761st were the first to go home. And then the unit starts to fall apart and then things are quite different. But the 761st, for the time that, from the time that it stood up to May 8th, is just this incredible fighting unit. So why would anyone feel the need to say that they liberated a concentration camp? My guess, well, let me go back here real quick. All right. There was a Army combat correspondent named Tres Van Anderson, and I went to Atlanta to go through his papers, and he wrote the first history. Almost sort of like a cruise book, but it's incredibly accurate. And it's a pretty solid history on the 761st. And he got himself ordered to them immediately after the war so that he could write this. And really interesting guy. And if you go to the 761st website, I just can't think of what it is offhand, 761st.org, not com, but .org. You can see a copy of this. Let's see. Hold on. So, and there's no mention in there of concentration camp liberation. So by the 1980s, children of the tankers of the 761st are coming home and because they're learning that that Black soldiers never fought in World War II. And it seems to me that some of these men started to feel forgotten. And we're like, well, you don't want to remember us for our combat service. We'll give you something to remember us by. We'll liberate a concentration camp. And technically, the whole concentration camp liberation credit is its own area of study. The U.S. Holocaust Museum has cognizance over making that decision. And the division to which the 761st was attached to at the end of the war did in fact get credit. There were elements of that division that did liberate concentration camps. So one in particular. So the division got credit for concentration camp liberation. So technically the division did. I just don't think the 761st was involved. Members of the 761st latched on to this and started to promote that they were involved in camp liberation. And sure enough, people became interested in the 761st, and I was guilty of it also because of camp liberation. So I think that's where all that came from. And I said earlier, the story of the 761st and really the story of Black service in the armed forces is a story of opportunity. And it's just so true of the men of the 761st, and all of them saw opportunity. And a number of them stayed in for an entire career. So my book looks at the opportunity. Other people have covered the 761st and look at it a little differently. Morgan Freeman optioned my book twice for a feature film. I don't think he got the funding for the film. He did make a documentary, and he has a different take on the history of the 761st. I won't go into that, but if you juxtapose, look at my story, or how I see it as a story of opportunity, and a very successful standalone combat tank battalion, and you look at his work, you can just see how different historians looking at the information could come up with different conclusions. So that is a quick presentation on the 761st. I don't get into the particulars on combat. It's in the book. It's just, oh, well, I do want to mention, so Battle of the Bulge, which I call the German counteroffensive. December 16th, Germany launches its counteroffensive. And as you could see from that slide, the 761st is moving around. The 761st's involvement in the Bulge, as we Americans call it, really came at a place called Talay. And that was in January. It was the beginning of January for about 6 days. And the 761st fought the Germans there and just ran in tremendous resistance. And then at this time, you're not really defeating the Germans. The Germans decide, okay, we're not going to fight anymore. And they just kind of fade like deers into a tree line and disappear. So that's how that engagement wrapped up. But the 761st involvement in the Bulge was really in January at Talay. So that's something I wanted to mention. I said all the other combats covered. Combat to me is something you need to read or go over yourself. It's very hard to talk about. So that's really it. If there are any questions, or John.
That is absolutely fascinating. It's a great story, and it kind of illustrates that history is not as simple as we try to make it sometimes. There are all kinds of nuances that you have to factor through. But let me change the subject just for a minute, because I understand you're working on your next project, which sounds very interesting. And I don't know how much you can say about it at this point, but can you give us a little tease about what you're working on?
Oh, so like I said, I kind of take this journalist view of, oh, that's interesting. That's a great story. So as I mentioned, so happened with the 761st. My husband's father fought for Germany as at age 16. And I thought that was interesting. And I really wanted to do a story on it. And so this is back to 2008, and had pursued it and really didn't get anywhere, and had looked at doing a magazine article on it, pitched it to my magazine. It was interesting. Their reaction was, well, we can't write about that. They may have killed Americans. I'm like, okay, well, maybe. And they didn't. But so I have pursued the story through the teens and everything, and it finally fell into place around, I'd say, 2021, when I started researching it, and a publisher has picked it up on, but I don't want to say much about the publisher because we haven't signed the final paperwork yet. So this new work is the story of child soldiers in the Third Reich. So the title, the working title, is To Die for Hitler, Child Soldiers, the Third Reich, a story of light, hope, and promise gone wrong. It's it's actually a very positive story about the children of Germany, how they saw it as a story of light and hope for the greater Germany, But it all of course, goes wrong at the end when they lose the Greater Germany. So it's the story of child soldiers in Adolf Hitler's Germany.
Very interesting. I often say, as fascinated as we are about World War II, it really was just a global tragedy on so many levels. And I think this sounds like an important story that needs to be told. So we'll look forward to that, in the future. Work at your own pace. Don't hurry, but looking forward to seeing that out in print. And maybe we'll have you back when, that's a finished product for you as well. In the meantime, we'll say to all our listeners, Gina's book is available in our gift shop at the National D-Day Memorial. Well, not today because it's a big glacier up there. We'll reopen once everything thaws out, but certainly email our gift shop crew and they can send you a copy. But let me encourage you to read that. It's a fascinating story. Another untold aspect of World War II that we get to help tell. And Gina, it's just been a great privilege to have you with us and tell this story, bring the 761st to light a little bit more, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, John. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And again, we thank you all for joining us, and look for new events, new lectures, new programs on our webpage and calendar events. And we hope to see you all soon. So thanks again.